Name's Phil Cox, and I won the Great British Giveaway. I'd say, why not? What is it? The price of a text and £2 to enter. And if I can win it, anybody can win it. And they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Prime Minister Sunak calls a meeting in Downing Street to discuss growing anti-Semitism on university campuses. I'll be asking tonight, should the protests that we're seeing be closed down and stopped, as they have been in many American universities? British Gas say they want to mandatorily put in smart meters into our homes. Over my dead body, say I. And in South Africa, there's a general election coming up in a couple of weeks' time. There's a new political party with a leader, Gayton McKenzie, who is being called the Black African Trump. He joins us live from Cape Town. Hold on to your hats for that one. But before the programme, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong. The Chancellor has cautioned the Bank of England against cutting interest rates too quickly. The bank's decided to hold borrowing costs at the same level, 5.25%, for a sixth time. But Governor Andrew Bailey says he's optimistic inflation will continue to fall and has suggested an interest rate cut could come as soon as next month. Jeremy Hunt urged the bank not to take risks with inflation.
I welcome the fact the Bank of England's obviously thought about this very hard. They take this decision independently, and I would much rather that they waited until they're absolutely sure inflation is on a downward trajectory and rushed into a decision that they had to reverse at a later stage. What we want is sustainably low interest rates, and I think what's encouraging is that the Bank of England governor, for the first time, has expressed real optimism that we're on that path.
Pro-Palestinian protesters have been gathering in the Swedish city of Malmö ahead of the second Eurovision semi-final. Hundreds of demonstrators have been waving Palestinian flags in the city's historic Market Square in opposition to Israel's participation in the song contest. Crowds could be heard booing last night during Israel's performance. Organisers have also been forced to apologise after Sweden's Eric Saad wore a Palestinian scarf, a breach of the contest's ban on political symbols. Labour's new MP, Natalie Elphicks, apologised for comments she made about sexual assault. The MP for Dover announced her defection from the Tories to Labour moments before PMQs yesterday, but it's ignited a backlash amongst some Labour MPs after comments Ms Elphick made in defence of her former partner, who was convicted of assaulting two women. However, the Labour chair, Annalise Dodds, says she's already been held to account.
Well, those were very, very serious issues. The sexual assault that was rightly prosecuted, and of course there was a parliamentary process that followed that, including a parliamentary process that applied to Natalie Alfick. So it's absolutely right that there was accountability there. It's an incredibly important matter. Every workplace, including Parliament, has got to be free of sexual harassment.
And the Home Office has removed figures on French efforts to stop small boat launches from its website. The U-turn comes a little more than a week after it first started publishing the data in an effort to show cooperation between French and UK authorities. Well, the most recent figures had shown French authorities stopped more than 1,000 migrants from launching boats since last week. And for the latest, you can sign up to our alerts, scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Nigel.
Good evening. In response to the protests at universities and growing anti-Semitism, today the Prime Minister called a roundtable meeting in Downing Street. He wants to stamp out anti-Semitism. He wants our universities to be bastions of tolerance. Well, you're a bit late, old son, on that one, I think. I've been saying for some years that I felt that our universities in this country had become madrasas of Marxism. Well, I think we can throw racism into the pot now as well. I am pretty unimpressed by all of them. Last night, this is hard to believe actually, the National Union of Students voted to expel the Union of Jewish Students. I mean, quite unbelievable that it happened. Even more unbelievable how little coverage that story has had today across the breadth of mainstream media. And then last night at the Cambridge Union, a good friend of mine, Peter Thiel, he's an American billionaire entrepreneur. He and Elon Musk together launched PayPal just over 20 years ago. Peter Thiel was speaking at an Oxford Union debate. This is how he was greeted during his speech.
Since October 7th, 14,000 children in Palestine have been murdered, and Palantir is complicit in that. Your actions are complicit in the genocide of thousands of people. Rather than platforming people like you, this university should be calling on the government to an immediate two-way embargo with Israel, and yet your technology is ensuring that hospitals are being bombed. You are complicit in genocide, and this university is platforming people who are complicit in genocide.
And if that wasn't bad enough, when Peter Thiel tried to leave, he was literally stopped from leaving the university in his car, and you can see these pictures, people blocking the road, waving their Palestinian flags, and a distinguished foreign guest who'd accepted an invitation, unpaid of course, to go and speak at the Cambridge Union will, I've no doubt, never ever go there again. Do you know, for the last 5 years, Cambridge University have asked me to go and speak at the Union every single year. I've said no every time. Having seen what happened there last night, I'm right not to go. Who in their right minds would ever now go to have a free speech, open debate at the Cambridge Union? Which brings into question what the point of universities actually is. In America, many of these protests have been stopped. And it's fine for people to protest, but not to put up permanent camps, not to start using language that is, frankly, openly, easily visible as anti-Semitism. I do believe in free speech. I do believe in the right to protest, but I think these protests should be stopped, as they have been at many American universities. What say you? Should the protests be stopped? Farage at gbnews.com. Well, joining me down the line is James Price, Director of Government Engagement at the Adam Smith Institute and a former Special Advisor at the Department of Education. James, if we can't have free speech, if distinguished, and Peter Thiel is a very distinguished man, no question about that, if they can't go to a university without demands for them to be deplatformed, if it's not about free thinking and expanding the mind of young people, what is the point of university?
It's a very, very good point. And unfortunately, it's not even a timely one. This is a debate that's been had for a long, long time. Of course, it used to be the left wing who were very pro-free speech. It was one of the things they were proud of, because all the institutions used to be controlled by stuffy old people like you and I who would say, no, you can't say that, you can't say that. And that's where things like the Oxford Union and that I was president of, and the Cambridge Union as well, which are meant to be separate and independent of the universities, came up, so that people could have a free place where they could debate these kinds of things. Because you never know, you might be wrong, you might learn something in these places, but that's not the point of universities anymore. And you used the phrase madrasa. I think you're spot on. I mentioned that I was president of the Oxford Union. Weirdly, I did it about 10 years after I was a student, and a prank that kind of went too far during lockdown when all the rules got changed. So I went back as the oldest ever president and saw quite how far the universities had fallen in 10 years. And like you, I got called every ist and every phobe going. And then you kind of go, okay, why do you think that? Have you read this person's book? Have you heard what they've got to say? And you just get these sort of blank stares. And this is the problem. They don't know what they're talking about.
And it's happened very quickly. I remember going to the Oxford Union 20, 25 years ago. I went many times, and I was debating issues that were minority issues, leaving the EU, controlling our borders, real minority issues at the time. And whilst I'd always lose the vote, I was actually listened to with a degree of respect. That wouldn't happen now, would it?
No, and you saw it in that video there that Peter Thiel is giving an answer. There's always a question and answer session in these things, and anybody who's a member can stand up. And part of the fun is that you've got some little upstart 18-year-old who can challenge Peter Thiel, Nigel Farage, whoever it may be going in there. But this woman's not interested in that. She gets up halfway through an answer, rudely starts bleating into it, and is filming herself, of course, because that's the whole point. And you know, what are they actually complaining about? They're complaining about an issue thousands of miles away. And we've been told in university now for decades, rightly, that racism is very terrible. And it's got to a point now where racism is the worst thing anybody can ever do. And fair enough, nobody wants to be racist. It's obviously very terrible. But when it comes to the single issue of that, these lefties fail. They're the ones saying, actually, you know, Jews can't walk freely on American campuses. They start targeting people who look openly Jewish. And whilst it starts with Jews, as we know from history, it never stops with them.
First they came for the Jews. Quick final thought on this. I think the encampments being there on a permanent basis actually foments this kind of extreme behaviour more and more. They've had their fun. Is it time to close down these protests?
Yeah, I think so. I think that these hardcore lefties are basically communists at this point, and they don't actually care about the freedoms that make our country great. Things like free speech, freedom of assembly, all this kind of stuff. And they take advantage of it and they use it. You look at every Saturday in London and other major cities, it's now become a no-go zone for people who look, quote, openly Jewish, and frankly pretty unpleasant for the rest of us. It's time to get a better balance of rights in this country. And those who want to study or just frankly walk down Oxford Street in peace on a Saturday, they should have their rights respected over and above these, frankly, increasingly smelly commies in these camps.
James, I'm with you all the way, even with your last comment, I have to say. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I mentioned, folks, earlier that the National Union of Students voted to expel the Union of Jewish Students last night, when I'm very pleased to be joined by Orel Toblem, president of the Israel Society at King's College London. Orel, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much for having me on, Nigel.
I've been in and out of current affairs and politics and media for 30 years, exactly 30 years.
Congratulations.
Well, I've survived. I never thought I'd read out a statement like that, that the Union of Jewish Students have been expelled. What's going on?
Well, you know, Nigel, I'd love to say that I'm shocked or horrified or surprised, at the very least. But unfortunately, I'm not. This is clearly the product of decades of leftist idiocy. And the fact that it hasn't been clamped on earlier is absolutely insane. It's ridiculous to have students call for the NUS to essentially divest from UJS and for Jewish students to no longer have representation across the country is ridiculous.
It's totally ridiculous, but it's happened. I mean, you're at UCL. What's
KCL.
Sorry, I apologise, KCL. What's the situation there?
Not good. Frankly, not good. I've had numerous meetings with the administration in order to discuss the clear institutional anti-Semitism problem, not only at KCL, but also in the student union. We have had instances in which students have been verbally harassed. We have incidents in which academic staff have posted clear violations of the 2006 Terrorism Act, and otherwise staff, professors, lecturers in war studies especially, such as Dr. Dirtha Rosenau, who actually was hired after October 7th, but on October 7th posted tweets in celebration of the fact.
I don't know the individual. Yeah. I'll take your word for it.
Thank you.
OK, it's a pretty awful situation. Are Jewish students afraid to be on campus?
Of course. Of course. I mean, what else can they feel? And when you have the NUS who suddenly say, oh, it's absolutely shameful that such lies spread misinformation and fear amongst Jewish students at a time that is already filled with tension, that is the most hypocritical phrase that I have ever heard.
So when I said earlier that the Prime Minister's call for unions to be bastions of tolerance, that ship has sailed.
Well, I mean, they're
how do we turn this round?
Authoritarianism.
How do we turn that, or do we turn this round?
It's very difficult. Very difficult to do so, unless there is a shutdown of these protests, because the truth is they're not going to stop, Nigel. Even if they try and get what they want, and they most likely will not, they cannot, they're not going to stop because they're addicts. They are addicted to the feeling that they get when they imagine themselves as saviours. And that is not going to stop anytime soon.
Which really says that the government needs to now act on our university sector, perhaps on our secondary school sector as well, and make it very, very clear that we as a country won't tolerate this. But that would take brave leadership, wouldn't it, from any government?
Of course. Of course. Brave leadership and also brave policing.
I sense there's no optimism in you at all.
I think after months of slamming my head into a wall, trying to justify to seasoned academic professionals how and why certain incidents and statements are anti-Semitic and genocidal and indicative of support for terrorism in nature, that does not fill me with optimism at all. It's actually indicative of a much wider issue in British institutions in which we have allowed individuals with clear anti-British motives to fester.
Orel, it's quite a depressing situation that you paint. But yes. I thank you for coming in and speaking as frankly as you have.
Thank you very much, Nigel.
It really is very, very bad indeed. Now, Patrick Christys joins me down the line from our Paddington studio with another exclusive. What have you got, Patrick?
Yes, well, I decided to go to that Oxford University Pro-Palestine encampment outside their Museum of Natural History. It was a fascinating experience. Here's a little snapshot of it, Nigel.
Everyone's linked arms to try to force us, I think, out. It's a bastion of freedom of speech, Oxford University. Do you think this might be a bit fascist? Is this a little bit fascist?
Palestine!
No? OK.
Yes, so there we go. That once great institution, Oxford University, a bastion for sculpting the best young minds, not just in Britain, but around the world as well, reduced to a load of mass-wearing, unwashed fake communists. Their worldview was somewhat shattered, Nigel, when people kept coming up to say that they watched GB News, both students and members of the public, which didn't do us any favours. But on a very serious note, yes, that company is not going away anytime soon. And if you really do look at it and think about it, what would it have been like if I had been Jewish or quotes unquote visibly Jewish going through that particular encampment? It would not have been a good, pleasant experience. And 108 members of staff at Oxford University have signed up for their support, and members of staff were driving past tooting their horns as those people were doing all of that. So, you know, all right, there might be some comical elements to it, but actually it's a very serious point, and it'll be all over my show.
Patrick, I laughed at it and thought I shouldn't be laughing, but it very much, as you say, if 108 professors and lecturers have signed up, it's very much what Orel was telling us a moment ago. Patrick, thank you. We'll watch that later. After the break, we'll talk about Lord Cameron. Having been to America and told them their fortunes, he's now telling the European Union what to do. But is this really the man? Does he actually have that level of authority on the world stage? I don't really think so.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Rishi Sunak has come out fighting and declared war on what he's called the UK's sick note culture. The country's welfare state bill costs the average taxpayer now £2,000 every single year for every British taxpayer. Astonishing numbers, Catherine. Simply mind-bending. 69 billion quid every year now goes on benefits. I paid my tax bill last month. Where did your tax go? I clicked on it. Long-term sickness and benefits is now second only to the NHS on what we spend our tax pound on. This is simply unsustainable.
That's exactly what the Prime Minister said. 69 billion a year on long-term sick and disability benefits, projected to rise to 90 billion by the end of the next Parliament if nothing has done. As he said, it is totally, totally unsustainable. And the message from Rishi Sunak really is, tough love. You're going to take your medicine. It's going to be good for you. You may not like it. Let's have a look at what he had to say earlier.
Everyone with the potential should be supported. And not just to earn, but to contribute and belong. And we must never tolerate barriers that hold people back from making their contribution and from sharing in that sense of self-worth that comes from feeling part of being something bigger than ourselves. And that is why this is a moral mission, and why the value of work is so central to my vision for welfare reform.
Certainly, Rishi Sunak said in the speech, in the period since the pandemic, something has gone wrong. Of course, millions of people had their wages paid by furlough. Now, that was an entirely artificial situation in an exceptional circumstance, but quite a lot of people left the workplace and simply haven't come back.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I asked you, is it time these protests outside the universities were stopped? Well, some very strong responses coming in. Clive says, it's about time all of the protests were stopped. Alfred says, yes, close them down now. There's no messing around with these answers. Shane says, these anti-Jewish protesters on universities should absolutely be shut down. I'd also go one step further and close down the London protests. And do you know what, Shane? You know, I want us to live in a country where we can speak freely. I want us to live in a country where we can demonstrate. But I'm not sure demonstrating every single Saturday is really what ought to be allowed. The police, of course, do have other things to do. Now, Lord Cameron, having been off, of course, recently to America, telling them what they should do in terms of their Ukrainian funding, is now telling the European Union that we must be tougher on Russia and China, we must be more robust, and that other EU countries ought to now make a commitment of 2.5% to NATO. And I'm joined by Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD and former senior British military advisor to US Central Command. Chip, I just really wonder whether this is the right messenger, whether, you know, the man that launched us into really quite disastrous Libyan war, which we entered without any thought of how it might end, finished up with ISIS being formed, finished up as the late Gaddafi. I'm not praising him as a man, but he said millions of people would cross the Mediterranean if you put me out. How is this the right guy to go around the world telling everyone their fortune?
Well, the first thing I think is he was Prime Minister for 6 years, from 2010 to 16, which gives him significant diplomatic clout on the international stage. And of course, during his tenure in 2014 at Celtic Haven, that was the NATO summit in Wales, which established the 2% baseline, which was due to be finalised in 2024, this year. So having the heft of his former position, and one of the pub quiz questions in the future will be name all the foreign secretaries since 2016 and no one will get it right. He is the right man because we are a diplomatic power.
All right, he's got heft because of who he's been.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take that. I'll put my personal feelings to one side. It's just the Libya thing that really gets me. That was badly thought through, wasn't it?
It was. It was a European sort of thing which the Americans had to get on top of. Reluctantly. And, of course, there was no defined end state. There was no great strategy. And that's where it went wrong. And, of course, now, because of that and Iraq, we had the Chilcot inquiry, which gives you a good checklist for looking how you should do things in a strategic sense in the future.
Now, Donald Trump has been really pushing NATO members very, very hard, both when he was president and, indeed, in this campaign. It's all well and good, Cameron, talking about 2.5%, but we've literally only got half of the NATO members now paying 2%. Now, and I actually believe that Trump's message is very positive and is designed to be positive. But don't we need to get to 2% before we tell them 2.5%?
Well, there's two aspects to that. The first thing that Donald Trump was really on about was about the non-bill payers and not coming to the assistance of those. But the second thing is, the closer you get to Ukraine and Russia, the more you find the GDP allocated to defence. So, for example, Poland is the biggest at 3.9%, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania over 2.5%, Romania over 2.5%, Finland, the longest border now with Russia, 2.5%, and the other newest member of NATO, Sweden, is giving another 700 million crowns this year to bring it to 2.1%. So it's those who drift away from the closeness to Russia, which are the
It's not quite as imminent. Yeah, and Ireland spend virtually nothing.
Well, Ireland is not a member of NATO.
I know.
And is a neutral country.
But we kind of give protection to Ireland.
We do the air patrol over Ireland, that is true. There's a reciprocal arrangement about that. I think Ireland will significantly raise its defence budget because of the Russians loitering off their coastline, particularly in terms of the undersea cables in future, which is a national interest for us also in the North Sea.
It just amuses me, the Irish government attack us all the time, and yet we seem to be very generous in terms of air support and help. Chip, here's the thing. You know, we've got a commitment from this government to up defence spending to 2.5% by 2030. Not that they'll be there. Labour have said they will up defence spending perhaps up to 2.5% if they can afford it. So actually, you know, when David Cameron says that security will be on the ballot paper at the general election, I thought John Healey was pretty impressive at the dispatch box the other day. There isn't a lot between them, is there really?
No, I don't think there is, and both have said 2.5%, but with a different message at the end of it. The 2.5% or 2% or 3% or whatever you come to is actually strategically illiterate. It's what you buy for your buck. And the reality is that we have between 3 and 6 times as much combat power as Russia in terms of AFVs, tanks, fighter aircraft, artillery pieces. And you'll never open a second front if you're strategically not strategically literate from a Russian sense. So the notion that we will be at war or in a pre-war period, you always need to define what that really should mean. My own view is that we're actually in a long peace period and we can preserve that by continued deterrence. Indeed, it's really Montgomery from the early 50s as D. Kerr saying that the test match is indefinitely postponed due to the deterrent posture of the Western alliance. We're still in that posture.
I absolutely hope you're right on that. Now, final thought and very tough question. Take, for example, the health service. We've gone in the last few years from spending 7% of GDP to over 10% of GDP, and fewer of us can get GP appointments and the waiting lists get bigger, all of which makes me think maybe we're not spending the money very well. It's much more difficult to work out with defence whether the money that is spent on defence procurement, whether we're getting value for money. But there have been an awful lot of stories that whenever the MOD takes something on, it's over budget, it's delayed, it's late. As somebody who's been very closely involved in this, do we need to improve? You know, we're going to spend more money, fine. Do we need to improve the way we're spending it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're holding £17 billion worth of risk in the equipment programme from the NAO, National Audit Office, statistics, and you give more money, that will be consumed by these equipment programmes. So the best way to have more money is to grow the economy. A growing economy gives you a bigger GDP, and hope we then spend it wisely.
And if we're not spending it wisely, what do we do?
Well,
I know it's hard.
You need to reform things, and you can only reform things in either functional or structural terms, changing the culture of waste in all government departments. There is significant waste in all government departments. If you can't get 10% waste out over a 3-year period each year, then you're not looking well enough.
That's a very good point on which to finish. Chip Chapman, as ever, thank you very much for joining me. In a moment, British Gas. Yeah, the boss of British Gas on his £8 million a year says that 44% of his customers haven't got smart meters, and he thinks they should be installed without us having any choice at all. Well, those that watch this show regularly know that I'm completely opposed to smart meters. In a moment, I'll tell you why. Over my dead body.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather updates from the Met Office here on GB News. Another cracking day tomorrow, if you like it fine, warm and sunny. If anything, a little bit warmer than today with light winds thanks to this chunky area of high pressure. Hasn't been fine everywhere today. There has been these weather fronts just trickling across northern Scotland, still bringing some outbreaks of rain, particularly for Caithness, Sutherland and spreading across the Northern Isles. A bit of patchy rain at times across Aberdeenshire too. But for most, it's dry and fine out there. Generally clear skies. A bit of mist and low cloud returning to parts of eastern England, and a few fog patches are possible in the south, where temperatures in the countryside could dip down to 3 or 4 Celsius. Most towns and cities, though, starting tomorrow at 10 or 11 Celsius. And most will start tomorrow with plenty of sunshine, and for many it'll just stay that way. We will see again some misty conditions around a few coasts, particularly perhaps East Anglia, east coast of Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, and a bit more cloud moving into the Western Isles through the day. But any early rain across Shetland should clear. For most, it's fine. Sunny spells and warmer than today, 21 to 23, maybe 24 or even 25 in 1 or 2 locations. Another fine day to come on Saturday. Again, the possibility of some mist and low cloud affecting eastern coast. A small chance of 1 or 2 isolated but heavy showers over northern England and southern Scotland. But for many, fine again. And if anything, a little warmer, 24, 25 degrees, a little cooler around some coasts. Goodbye.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christys. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christys tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I think most people get smart meters because they're effectively bullied into it. I keep getting these letters telling me it's urgent that I have to get a smart meter. I've had a knock at the door telling me I've got to get a smart meter. I am not getting a smart meter. And why? Because when you're... and they'll tell you you'll save money and all the rest of it. Of course, you won't. Why? Because they're using it because they want... And they admit it. The water companies admitted openly to manage demand, which means when it suits, they can turn you off. When the windmills and the solar farms don't produce enough electricity, they can turn you off. The same with water and the same indeed with gas. Well, Chris O'Shea, who's the boss of British Gas, who, as I mentioned before the break, earned £8.2 million last year, has said smart meters should be mandatory in every household in order to, have you guessed it, meet net zero targets. There you are. There you are. You have to be hooked up to a smart meter to meet net zero. He's alarmed that 44% of his customers don't have them. And that may well be, Chris O'Shea, because they don't actually want them, because they don't trust you or any of the other companies. I'm joined by Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Harry, when you get these letters or these phone calls, the impression the companies give you is that legally they have the right to do this, but they don't, do they?
That's right. And I have experience of this as well. I was just recently pressured relentlessly on the telephone to get a smart meter. What we see is that compulsion is the name of the game when it comes to net zero. And this is the latest example of that. We're being asked as consumers to facilitate the needs of the companies, of the government. It used to be that these companies competed to meet our needs and we had choices as consumers. Now it seems to have flipped around, with the business class, the political class, telling people you have to behave in this way, you have to get the smart meter, you have to drive an electric car, you have to get a heat pump, and they don't seem to accept it.
Now, at the moment, and we have made this point to our viewers and listeners before, you know, however much they give the impression that they have the right to do this, legally, you can stand your ground.
Well, you can. I would have certainly urged people to think about their personal circumstances. Now, you know, when you look at the economics of this, you will find, you know, that there can be savings from, you know, matching demand and supply. However, it's reliant on people using energy maybe at different times. The people who will be suffering from this will be the 9-to-5ers, people going into jobs, they have to go into the office, whereas maybe people who have the luxury of working from home and detached homes, who tend to be fairly wealthier, you know, will be able to choose to use energy when they need it. And, you know, a Public Accounts Committee report just last year found that, you know, the benefits of the smart meter programme went overwhelmingly to the richest. And that's no surprise. We see that across many green policies.
Yeah, and the worst off, of course, of all are those on prepay meters. You know, and they're the ones, I think, paying the highest prices for everything, aren't they?
That's right. Energy costs go, you know, are felt most pronounced by the poorest people in our society. Getting energy bills down is a moral imperative for the government. They've spent the last 20 years, you know, focusing on decarbonisation to the exclusion of affordability, reliability, national security.
Yeah, more broadly, the Global Warming Policy Foundation, deniers, I mean, some of the worst people in the country. There does seem to be here, and particularly across Europe, quite a big change going on. The farmers' protests were perhaps one example of saying, look, this green policy is all going a little bit too far. I mean, EVs perhaps being a case in point. Very interesting, I thought, overnight, that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and, you know, he is one of our top 2 leading industrialists. So originally Boris said, after 2030, we will only be able to buy EVs, new EVs, no more petrol and diesel cars. And he was going to save the planet. It was all wonderful stuff. And then, of course, they said, well, it's not actually going to work, so we're going to shift that to 2035. Now Jim Ratcliffe is saying 2035 is completely unrealistic because people have stopped buying EVs in the same numbers.
Well, what we had was the ZEV mandate, which set a target. You know, so we only saw a very modest change. It was only in the period between 2030 and 2035 that, you know, that just 20% of people can buy petrol cars at that time. So it's a small number. The leeway isn't very much. And so rather than only be allowed to buy plug-in hybrids during that 2030 to 35 period, people were able to buy now petrol cars as well. So there's been a modest slide back. The government needs to go further. You know, we've heard Claire Coutinho just recently speak about how net zero can't be about compulsion. It has to be about consumer choice.
The mood music from government is changing. Last thought, heat pumps. There are some people who think they're marvellous, others say they cost an absolute fortune when it gets below 4 or 5 degrees. What's happening with the uptake of heat pumps?
Well, you know, when it comes to heat pumps, I'm not pro or anti-heat pump. What I think is people should be able to choose. And it's going to depend on what people's own house is like, whether it will work well for them.
Yeah.
I urge people
so a
to
modern
look into
house,
the
it might
details.
work.
But certainly, a modern houses, it might work.
Yeah.
Certainly, the rollout's going much slower than the government's hoped. It hoped to introduce a clean heats market mechanism to enforce the uptake of heat pumps, and it wanted to introduce that in April this year. It's pushed that back after a backlash.
Everything's being pushed back, Harry. Thank you for joining me. Now, folks, what the Farage moments. The World Health Organization Treaty. Yes, I know, I've been banging on about it for some time. Maybe you think I've been a lone voice, but out there, someone is listening, because overnight we learn in an article on page 2 of today's Daily Telegraph that the government have said they won't sign the treaty if it commits us to give away, at the WHO's orders, up to 20% of our PPE, of our vaccines, or any other medical kit that we have. Government, we're not going to sign this treaty if they can take away 20% of our stuff during the next pandemic. But what I don't want to see is them signing the treaty, and this is the old European Union playbook, signing the treaty but coming back and saying, but we're not going to have that, so it's a huge victory. If this government signs that treaty, it will mean the World Health Organization, by an international binding treaty, will be able to tell us to lock down when they deem there to be a pandemic. That would be the most extraordinary surrender of sovereignty. It cannot be allowed. And I will be launching a campaign, a non-party campaign on Monday, looking for signatures. I'll be launching a petition next week to get a debate going in the House of Commons. How on earth can Brexit Britain sign away that much of our liberty? I want the government and the opposition to wake up to this. I'm really going to be on this case next week. Now, debanking. What is you see, in a way, I was one of the first known public figures to come out and say that I'd been debanked. Well, it's happening to a lot more people. And today, it was the turn of Andy Haldane, who'd been a senior economist at the Bank of England, and now is the chief executive of the Royal Society of Arts. Here was Andy Haldane earlier on.
I remember last year, Nigel Farage being debanked. Anyone remember that? I mean, since then, more than 140,000 companies have been debanked across the UK, including me. So I tried to open a bank account last year, and the bank was very nice, very straightforward process. Some application in. It came back a few weeks later, refusing me a bank account. No explanation given. So I thought I'd better dig into that, and they said, your account's been refused because you are politically connected by dint of working for the Bank of England. Now, 3 problems with that. One, I wasn't working for the Bank of England. I was working here. 2, the Bank of England is by statute independent from government. Right? Tricky. And 3rd, the Bank of England was their regulator, right? So the risk was to their regulator.
Do you know, I have a feeling that the debanking story will never go away. I'll be talking about it till the day I die, because I don't see any sense of reform coming. And he also put this slide up on the screen. Yes, he said that we're all Nigels now. Well, in many ways that's true, because too many people have been debanked. Now, in a moment, there is a general election coming up in South Africa in a couple of weeks' time, and there is a new up-and-coming figure in South African politics. His name is Gayton McKenzie, and some are saying this is Africa's Black Donald Trump. In a moment, we're going to speak to Gayton.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the quaint Derbyshire village of Sudbury, there's a storm brewing between the local football club and the National Trust. This grass field might seem unremarkable, but for hundreds of years it's been part of the Sudbury Hall estate, playing host to the village football and cricket matches. Now the National Trust are planning to put an end to that tradition in the name of biodiversity, with plans for trees and plants where the football club play. Some worry it breaks a memorandum of wishes from the late Lord Vernon, whose family have lived here since 1660. Manager of Sudbury FC Tom Crutchley says he's upset at the decision.
Naturally disappointed. We've been here, this is our 9th year. We've put a lot of effort into here to keep playing, to maintain it. I'm from the village originally, so personally it was, it is very upsetting.
MP for Derbyshire Dale Sarah Dines says the National Trust aren't respecting the history of the site.
I feel they're trampling over the wishes of historic owners who gave up this wonderful site for the nation. And for over 100 years people have played football and cricket here. It's incredibly sad. Incredibly sad, and it's against the wishes of a lot of people locally who've written to me from the village.
Sudbury Hall lives under the branding of the Children's Country House, a decision which Dines says is disrespectful to the history of the estate.
I mean, this is fake to make it into a children's theme park. It's almost a reimagining, and in fact that's the very words it says on their website. The house is reopened, it's been reimagined. I don't want our heritage to be reimagined. I think the National Trust it's been captured by people who have different ideas than most people in this country.
Whilst the public will still be able to roam these historic grounds, the village feels like a legacy is being snatched away. Jack Carson, GB News, Sudbury.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
30 years ago tomorrow, Nelson Mandela became the president of South Africa. There is no doubt he was a very great man in many ways. Sadly, since he's gone and South Africa has been led by the ANC, the country has gone downhill. Massive unemployment, rolling power blackouts, rising crime, especially in places like Johannesburg, on a level that is truly extraordinary. A very, very weak currency. And there are many huge illegal immigration into the country and many, many other problems. Well, the South Africans have a general election on the 29th of May. And there is a new party. Well, it's not that new. It's been around a decade, but it's beginning to make some gains. It's called the Patriotic Alliance. It is led by Gayton McKenzie. He's the president of the party. Some say that he is the African Donald Trump. I don't know, but I think it's about time a British audience got to find out who this man is. Now, Gayton, welcome to the programme. I have to say, I've never started any conversation with a political leader by saying that he was, in former times, a gangster who spent some time in prison. But I understand that is your background.
Thanks for having me, Nigel. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be on your show. Well, you know, as I said to you, in South Africa, you had two choices growing up. You could either say, yes, boss, which was a derogatory term, not where you understand boss. You had to say to white people, like my father did, you had to bow before white people, and he said, yes, boss. Or you could decide, listen, I'm not going to do this. And I was from the generation that said, I'm not going to do this, and crime was a career choice for me. And I got involved in crime at an early age went to jail, spent my whole youth in prison, then I realized crime doesn't pay. Lost my whole youth. And I came out and I said, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. Fortunately, I became very successful. I wasn't a successful criminal. I became a successful entrepreneur. And then I look at my country and I'm like, my country is being overtaken by illegal foreigners. Country is going backwards, and the majority of our problems is bad government, but also the inability of the government to see the harm that illegal foreigners are causing.
It's very interesting. I mean, I've seen Gayton in the last few weeks. There have been some by-elections in the Cape, in which your party has started to get some impressive scores and to win some seats. The latest polling I saw puts you on about 10% nationally. So, you know, you could well be the person holding the balance of power, given that the ANC are now down below 50%. Are you feeling at the moment that you are the man that will be holding the balance of power after this election?
Well, that's the plan. That's the plan. We want to be the kingmakers. We are already kingmakers in the city of Johannesburg, and we are already kingmakers in other towns in South Africa. We want to have 10% of the vote, and we will then decide who's going to be the next president. We might choose ourselves. But that's the plan, to be the kingmaker and to hold the balance of power. And all indications currently is showing that we are that party. I mean, only competition we have in that terrain is a party run by another madman called Julius Malema. And he is also aiming for the spot of becoming kingmaker, but I think we want to beat him to it.
Yeah, so give us a taste, if you would, Gayton. Give us a taste of the Patriotic Alliance manifesto. You mentioned earlier, you know, the staggering levels of illegal immigration coming into South Africa. What does Gayton do, in policy terms, about illegal immigration? Oh, I think we've lost Gayton. That is a complete disaster. Are you hearing us, Gayton? Oh, that's a real shame. That is a real shame, because I was hoping, because I have had a look at the manifesto, and I mean, this guy is just not messing around in any way at all. One of the interesting things about his time in prison, where he saw some pretty shocking, awful, violent things, is he's come out and not just become a successful speaker, businessman, also Christian. And, you know, he wants to put the teaching of Christ at the centre of children's education in South Africa. He feels that's gone and the country has lost its way. He believes, as one or two backbench Tory MPs in this country believe, that national service would give the nation's youth a sense of purpose, a sense of discipline. I mean, this is really full-on stuff when it comes to illegal immigration. Well, there's no messing around there. He is talking about mass deportations of those who have illegally come into South Africa, and crime, which blights South Africa in a way that I don't want to go anymore. I mean, I used to like to go there to fish. It's a fantastic country. It's got an amazing climate. But every time that I've gone, or members of my family have gone, they've been victims of crime of some kind, whether it's the car or the apartment they're staying in has been robbed. And he really wants to get tough on crime. In fact, I think this really perhaps is right at the heart of what he stands for. And he does support the death penalty. He does support much, much tougher prison sentences, albeit in prisons that are barbaric, prisons that treat people as human beings after the terrible experiences that he had. And it's really interesting. And he is a bit, maybe down the line, with a delay, we couldn't quite get the way he is. But if you Google Gayton McKenzie and see some of his campaign speeches, it's fascinating. And I have to say, the ANC have been, you know, I said Mandela was a great man, and I really, really meant that. But the ANC, I'm afraid, have been utterly corrupt, and South Africa has gone down the drain under them. And whilst they will still be the biggest party at the next election, I think many of us that want South Africa to do well have been praying for a Gayton McKenzie type figure to come along. Jacob, We didn't get a lot there, sadly, from him, but the fact the ANC are going downhill must be good news.
Must be good news. As you said, it's been enormously corrupt. That they even corrupted the Internal Revenue Service to make the collecting of taxes under Jacob Zuma harder. It's quite extraordinary how deep set the corruption under the ANC has been and has continued to be. And it could be one of the most successful countries. It's got wonderful resources. It's got a good infrastructure. It's got the possibility for a thriving economy. I used to be an emerging markets investor, and South Africa was always high on our list of places that were of interest. But then the policy decisions were wrong and the corruption took away profits.
Yeah, and I mean, the Cape, wonderful climate, that sort of garden coast where it actually rains quite a lot. It's green. They produce amazing wine. It's going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting. And this guy's life story is extraordinary.
Amazing, isn't it? I loved his line that I was a successful criminal and now I'm a successful entrepreneur. That's brilliant.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really was a pretty amazing line, wasn't it? And anyway, we will get Gayton McKenzie back at some point. The polls say he wins 10%. That does make him the Kingmaker next time round, which will be at the end of this month, and it's going to be really, really interesting. A quieter day in Westminster today, Jacob.
Well, it's Thursday, so most people have scooted off to their constituencies, so not
but
so much.
Still reeling from the defection yesterday.
Such a peculiar defection. Nobody can work out why somebody as right-wing as Natalie would go to the Labour Party. And I'm going to be speaking later to John McTernan, who joked that I should join the Labour Party. I grew up, and the funny thing is, the left has no sense of humour. They've gone they are so cross with John, and they're saying, "How can you invite that awful man?"
Well, there's even a rumour that they had to deny that somebody had said to me, "I should join the Labour Party."
Perhaps we should join together.
Well, that's marvellous. You're covering that. You're also going to talk about smart meters.
I am indeed, because this is about rationing. It's the opposite of business. What a business does is supply what its customers want when they want it and charge for it.
At a price they'll pay.
At a price they'll pay. Smart meters are about reducing demand so that people's houses are less comfortable and they use their electricity at less convenient times of day. And it's all for this green madness that we've got to get away from. That's right. I don't want my constituents to be cold and poor, and I want them to lead the lives they want to lead, not the lives they're told to.
Do you think that the debate is turning? It feels like it.
My only disappointment is that O'Shea was one of the most impressive people I dealt with whilst I was in government. He's absolutely on top of his brief. He understands it. He's a very effective businessman. He's a good operator in the corridors of Whitehall. So it's a pity that he is not putting the interests of his customers first, but is going for this mad green ideology.
Yeah. Well, we won't be bullied by O'Shea, and that's the way.
No, we won't. That's right.
Now, the really good news, folks, is that after 6 months of rain, the weather has finally turned. Alex Deakin, please cheer us up. Tell us what's coming for the next few days.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather updates from the Met Office here on GB News. Another cracking day tomorrow, if you like it fine, warm and sunny. If anything, a little bit warmer than today with light winds thanks to this chunky area of high pressure. Hasn't been fine everywhere today. There has been these weather fronts just trickling across northern Scotland, still bringing some outbreaks of rain, particularly for Caithness, Sutherland and spreading across the Northern Isles. A bit of patchy rain at times across Aberdeenshire too. But for most, it's dry and fine out there. Generally clear skies. A bit of mist and low cloud returning to parts of eastern England, and a few fog patches are possible in the south, where temperatures in the countryside could dip down to 3 or 4 Celsius. Most towns and cities, they're starting tomorrow at 10 or 11 Celsius. And most will start tomorrow with plenty of sunshine, and for many it'll just stay that way. We will see again some misty conditions around a few coasts, particularly perhaps East Anglia, east coast of Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, and a bit more cloud moving into the Western Isles through the day. But any early rain across Shetland should clear. For most, it's fine, sunny spells and warmer than today, 21 to 23, maybe 24 or even 25 in 1 or 2 locations. Another fine day to come on Saturday. Again, the possibility of some mist and low cloud affecting eastern coast. A small chance of 1 or 2 isolated but heavy showers over northern England and southern Scotland. But for many, fine again. And if anything, a little warmer, 24, 25 degrees, a little cooler around some coasts. Goodbye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather. on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. But you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/.